Episode 3, Planning a Succession. Welcome to Talking Family Business. My name is Leah Crowley, and in this 6-episode series, we're taking a look at succession plans, cycles, and future-proofing family businesses. Today, HLB Man Judd partner Stephen Preen is joined by Western Earth Moving's Managing Director Graham Ragg and Tom Ragg as we find out more about the nature of succession plans, how they ensure a smooth transition rather than a bump, and why the children of business owners need to be paying better attention. Welcome everyone, and welcome Tom as well.
Thank you, Leah.
Thanks, Leah.
Thanks, Leah.
Now Tom, I think we'll start with you.
Sure.
You are Graham's son.
Yes.
But you don't work for Western Earth Moving.
Correct. I'm Graham's eldest son.
He's also my favourite son, whose name begins with T.
That's a very good way to put it.
Who's in this room at the moment.
Who's the only one in this room.
Only one here right now. I have 3 brothers. Michael, who I think is coming on the podcast in a couple of episodes or something like that. So Michael is the next brother down, but he is far more senior in the Wem family. And I will leave that for you guys to discuss. But I worked at Wem when I was younger, a bit of stop and go sign, manning the receptionist desk on the weekends, all sorts of things like that. And then I've gone off to do lots of other things and been very involved in the media world and things that didn't really lend itself to too much Wem activity until a few years ago when Wem's priorities have shifted and they're chasing bigger, better, larger clients, and they need to look a little more polished. And so I've finally been able to come and infuse a lot of the skills and talents that I've gone off traveling the world like some sort of Shaolin monk. I've brought that back to the industry of being dirty.
Moving the earth.
Moving the earth.
Those words moved me so much, Tom. Thank you.
Oh.
Stephen, how complicated are succession plans to plan? I mean, who in the family should be taking the reins, and get the ball rolling, have the conversation going? Because I know that we were talking, Graham, you were talking about how didn't really talk about it at all. But that's, I would imagine, Stephen, that's not a normal thing.
No, the plan should be driven by the incumbent because it's their responsibility to make sure the show goes on and that you have the appropriate steps put in place to discuss and work out how it's all going to happen. With Wal, he had his own way of going about things. He knew Graham was there. They were both in it together and so forth. So he would weigh all that up and take it from there. I mean, the succession of Westerns was very much, talked about how, Graham had to pay for his share of the equity. That had to be funded, and how do we go about doing that without putting, Graham and his family at risk and the company at risk and so forth. So all those sort of things were discussed with Wal, and he agreed to undertake a share buyback plan in the operation. So effectively, Westerns financed the acquisition, and Wal was paid out his share of the value for the benefit of the rest of the family. So it would then depend on how he communicates that with the family as well, and that is an important thing. That the first step in a process is to discuss all those issues with the family members and go further, and which we'll talk about later, but go further as to each of them putting their thoughts on the table. But before they all bring their thoughts together, you talk to each person separately and try and get a consensus, or at least raise the issues and then start to deal with them.
Tom, I'm going to bring you back into this one.
Yes.
So as the son of a business owner, when or if the conversation about what happens to the business when Graham decides to retire, has that happened? Has it been open? What?
Yes, it has happened. It's taken place over the last couple of years. And I think it's fair to say that Mike is very interested in that. Obviously, it's his job now. It's his livelihood and this sort of thing. And there's 2 other brothers, younger brothers, Matt, who works out in the field for Wem, and Cam, who's not closely aligned with Wem. He's studying all sorts of interesting things, and he's the big brain.
Yeah, he's a brain and a half.
He's the big brain. So we're all very, very, very different people, and we're coming with different mindsets, different opinions, different. We couldn't really be more different. And it's not something that we discussed a lot in the past. I had felt that when I was younger, there was an expectation that I would go to Wem. It wasn't necessarily from my direct family. It was more the wider Wem family. There was always that expectation that I would join. So when I didn't, there was it didn't get talked about for a little while. And then Mike stepped up to the plate and everyone knew things would be cool. But over the last few years, as Graham has, started to move in that direction more and Mike has risen in seniority, there's kind of been that need to be a little more open with one another and have that difficult conversation about what happens in the future. We've got someone who's working in Leeds, heading up the company, essentially, the two I see, but there's another brother who's putting in just as many hours out in the field, working hard, all this sort of stuff. No one wants to sit around and go, how do we carve up the pie? That's not what we're doing. But being able to have a very open conversation like we have had over the last, I'd say 3 years, that's where it started to happen. It's weirdly removed a lot of the angst around the situation. So when it does happen, everyone knows what's going where. We've all got a clear idea of this isn't being done to solely benefit one brother over the others, or those of us that don't work there full time won't benefit. It's very clear, and I think that that will assist us as a family moving forward. There's no one's sitting around jealous or being petty or things like that. It's open, it's out there.
Yeah, and that's been something that Di, my wife, and I have been very much aware of. That we're lucky enough to have 4 sons and extended families and grandkids and all sorts of things like that, and we want to make sure that everybody gets a fair go, as well as making sure that the business is vibrant and carry on. I'm focused on the next 60 years now. Probably won't be there to raise my bat at the end of the 60, still on the team, but I might get to shout from the crowd or something like that. And that's our focus now. We're very much focused on being an infinite business and growing as healthily as we can. Tom's right with what he says there. We got some good advice from a few areas. One, obviously, from the Man Judd people, also from our legal team as how to go about this. And my sons have been very fortunate. The guys that are giving them advice are basically like uncles, and they're very interested. Right. Steve, etc., and our legal team very, very closely involved and looking after these. They've grown up a bit now, but helping look after them as good young men, helping them grow. And so we've tried to be pretty transparent how we go about it. We've got some good advice to form a family office to look after these things, and Man Judd help us very, very heavily with that. And we have some pretty regular meetings with all our family crew about that, and we're open with how that all sits. So
just sort of checking in, making sure that
it's a bit of transparency on how it all goes.
Now, Stephen, I mean, say there's a business owner that has 2 kids, one who's interested in working and taking over the family business, and the other just is not. They've got their own path, which is fine, like we said. How do you make both of them happy with the succession plan whilst realising their strengths and levels of interest?
To start with, I think just the ideas we just touched on with Tom and Graham about the open frankness of those discussions with the family and what do they all want to do at the beginning. The business is there. The business is also there to have people who have got the right skills to run it and who are the appropriate people in that business, what education do they have, and so forth. The other members, have they got a right to come into that business? The answer is yes, if they have the appropriate skills. Otherwise, you're divorcing the management of the business from the equity of the business. And that's where the other family members come into play. And as you progress through the years, the people with the equity have to consider how that will play out in the future and what other assets will be grown outside the business, as Graham alluded to with the family office, etc. You'll have your assets outside the actual operations, and that then creates a family business in its own right, which is, in this case, excludes the WEM operations, because that's what's feeding it. It's not straightforward, and it's very much an emotional type of period, because people have different thoughts, and some people just don't want to be involved in family businesses, and that's what can lead to businesses being sold, because you might have nobody who wants to come through. So you want to protect the legacy and grow the wealth and transfer that wealth to the next generations, but it might be in a different form.
I guess in that respect, for WEM and the Ragg family, everybody has grown up with it, and not so much stake a claim, but there's a sense of it's almost like the other family member. Would you say that for you, Tom?
Yeah, definitely. WEM has been a constant, huge driving factor in my life. And, as my dad said, a lot of the people that I consider uncles and things like that are people that I didn't quite realize until I was maybe 8 or 9. They weren't actual family members, but at our big family events, Wal invited them. They were part of the wider WEM family. And yeah, so I've always been invested and felt part of that family business, but it does have a different feeling to what it was, I'll say 30 years ago.
In what way?
Everything's on the books and above board now. And so it used to be that there'd been not backroom dealings, but there was a lot more handshake sort of dealings, and it was built around trust and the relationships. And those key relationships are so vital still, but it's less going out for drinks or, those types of things. That's how business used to be done.
Yeah. Look, I'll agree. It used to be maybe wine and dine, and for staff it would be go to the pub on a Friday. Then it became go to the gym on a Friday.
Yeah.
It's really transitioned, which is a great healthy thing. It's really changed around now. And now it's probably, I don't know, a house party or chit-chat or whatever you're doing. Social media.
A Zoom.
Zoom meeting. Bloody Zoom meetings. So there's been a lot of transition. I think there's a maturity of the business, Tom, and I think it's also a much more professional approach. You made reference earlier to the business needing to grow and be responsive and take on social media as a good tool for us to use, etc. That's one of the many transitions of professionalism that's come about from being, for our business, historically, really, we were good earth movers working in the dirt. Now we're delivering communities.
Correct. There has been, in the past, you worked with existing clients, and, if there was a good relationship and you've been working together for 30 years, then you didn't need to put a lot of effort over and aboard on the tender or things like that, the presentation of it, because everyone already knew each other. Whereas these days, it might be a dentist who wants to develop a small plot of land, or you might be trying to get into the industrial sector and do some things in the government. You need to show yourselves off in a different way. And to you guys' credit, you came to us and said, we need to polish up our look and we need to start being public-facing, because it had always been an internal messaging and talking to the people they knew. And so in the last 5 years, there's been a huge shift in being more presentable, and that in turn has raised the company's profile to be, you're putting out content up there with the biggest budgets out there, the biggest players in industry, and it's in turn made a lot of your competitors start to follow suit, and you're effectively helping your entire industry pull their socks up a little bit here in Australia by saying, hey, let's put a bit of effort into our presentation. We already put in this effort with our finished product. Let's celebrate the things that we're doing and position ourselves that way. And that's, we're talking a lot about future-proofing. That is how you're future-proofing the business at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's also elements such as, key relationships with Safe Work New South Wales as mental health ambassadors now, and relationships as key partners with the Westmead Children's Hospital, etc. Things that more of our community are keen to be involved with and get relationships out of. And, we've needed that polish. And, it's also relating back to, I suppose, even back to advice with Manjard, how do we broaden the base of the business to be more solid? We had various periods along the way when we had increased data. We've got data, as I said, falling at our ears now. But when we started to measure a lot more things, measure success of tenders, measure this, measure that, we were able to see where gaps were coming. And, it made us more responsive to go and dive into different areas, whether it's geographical or different types of work. It's made the family business, much, much more bulletproof along the way, Leah, to be able to be responsive and deal with things. But, you've got to have strong relationships. You've got to have a good base to work from and a good knowledge base to make that work. And on the family side of things, as we said, we've got to make sure that there's an openness. And, the openness is much more relevant to 2020 than it was in 2000. A couple of decades is a long time ago in terms of progression of even social behaviours and things, and how families interacted. I think what we did then was appropriate, it was a little bit closed. I think what we're trying to do now is very appropriate, and we probably talk about things too much sometimes.
I think it's great that you still use that word family so much, because it's been a family business, and that's how people have always seen WEM. But there's now been a shifting of thinking of, it's not just WEM family, it's you're providing for families. You are building communities. It's not we're laying roads, we're preparing future homes for families to build, grow, and develop their own story. And it all comes back to that idea of family, and whether that's our family supporting WEM, whether that's the WEM wider team family with the Christmas picnics and all sorts of adventures like that. It's that core value is just infused in the business's presentation to the public. It's always family focused.
Yeah, and it's a pretty easy way to be. I think it's something you can build upon pretty readily.
I think that's quite similar to HLB Man Judd. Everything I read about you guys is always bringing it back to that idea of personal connection, personal interaction, personal understanding of these businesses, and creating that long-lasting relationship. So I can see why that has worked so well for both of you for such a long time.
Yeah, the relationship is deadly important. Deadly is not the right word.
Extremely
important. And you develop from there. And, we talked about customers and so forth and employees, and everyone's in the mix. And it's like you look at a business, a family business, you got the existing business, you got the equity shareholders, and you got a ring of circles that you would have seen, and they all come together in the middle and cross over and so forth. And it's some of it's not easy, but at the end of the day, people work through it and develop their strategies on how they're going to progress.
I just need to quickly ask, Stephen, have you been to one of the Christmas parties or the family picnics?
I've been to the Christmas party.
And he's not going to tell you one story.
No stories from that.
Damn it. I was trying to sneak that in there, but they caught me. I felt maybe I could get it from you, Stephen, but no.
I remember when Tom used to come along to the annual drinks out at the hotel at Macquarie there. What was it called? It's still
El
there,
Rancho.
El Rancho, yeah.
It's going back a long while. Progress from there.
Yeah, look, one of the reasons it's progressed is for a long time we had Christmas parties at various function places, and we sort of lasted a year, and they'd say, don't come back. That's why it's progressed. That's the dim, dark ages. So the challenge we've got this year is how to do a few family functions.
That's right.
Amongst COVID. So we're working on that.
Yeah.
We'll make sure that...
You got your thinking caps on?
Yeah, and it's a wider team. It's not me. We've got a whole group of people looking at how to do it now that's effectively so that all the kids still get the presents they get every year. Santa still comes for everybody, et cetera, et cetera. So, we've got to be flexible.
Yeah.
So we'll come up with a solution. And that's a couple of months away, so we're not too stressed about that one yet.
But it's getting close.
There's weeks to go now.
Very, very close. Talking about, being flexible and stuff, obviously circumstances in businesses change, whether that be, outside, internal, external circumstances, whatever. Or that could potentially change the succession plans. So how close do we have to monitor them as an advisor to a business?
Well, if you look at what's going on now through the COVID period, there's various businesses which are going to obviously go to the wall through no fault of their own. But at the end of the day, that's a fact of business life. And if there might be the best course of action because they haven't got the finances in place to survive, or they haven't provided for their future finance sector, which is all very sad. But, hopefully a business can look ahead and react to the markets, but it can't react to something that's going on.
You guys, at least within your industry, you were deemed an essential service. Is that right?
Absolutely, by the government and by ourselves. And so as a business, our business, we largely work outdoors. And so we had we don't have to go to head office. We don't have to go on public transport. Most people drive to site every day. It's in the outer suburbs of Sydney, etc., and wider afield. We had to make sure that everybody observed the right social distancing on site and the right work practices in terms of cleanliness and sanitisation and looking after equipment and, public behaviour. Our office was different. We had to scatter people and do those sorts of things. That's all happened. We've adopted Teams and Skype and Zooms like nothing else for everyone that we deal with. One benefit is for us, we have left site meetings. We don't have to go and do those sorts of meetings. But look, things have changed around, but really our business has been largely bulletproof. We've had to really make sure that we're being responsive to our customers' needs, which have changed a bit. There's a vital push with some of those. We've got enough knowledge of market and opportunities to really pursue the right opportunities now. And we're doing that closely. As I mentioned Tom Roberts before. He's working closely with Mike and myself to really make sure we're best placed for now and the next 5 years on how we're going. So that's interesting.
It's interesting. Tom, do you reckon there's anything else?
Look, as I said, we've had some frank conversations about this sort of stuff, and the first one or two were a bit awkward. No one had full answers, and it was sort of advising the family that these conversations are going to take place. Is there a reason why you were so keen to get that sorted with us?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Number one, I love 4 sons, and I'm lucky to have 4, and that's great. And they look after Di and I so well. 2 of them around here, so I won't look at them because I might. No, I won't. I think that we always have an openness in our family on trying to look after things with that. And number 2, the way it happened for me 20-odd years ago wasn't as open. My dad wasn't as open a person, and I think it left a bit of doubt in parts of the family as to what had happened and how it had happened. And, I want to probably overkill that idea, and that's certainly the advice I got from Steve and his team, and they've helped us with that. They've helped us with family meetings in their office, at our house, those types of things. And they will only become more commonplace now as our business grows and the future rushes towards us. It's happening very fast. So, that's the reason probably, Tom. So if I annoy you too much about it, that's what it is.
I will extend on from that. As I mentioned earlier, that I had felt there was some expectation that I would work for WEM. When I didn't, it wasn't an issue. There was never any problem and stuff. But it wasn't until we started having these conversations a couple of years ago that I realised it was actually very important that I stay completely abreast of both WEM and the family stuff. Not in terms of sitting around counting coin. I'm not. But for the understanding the future success of the family and what our intended legacy will be, and how Mike is positioned, and all these sorts of things. How much would both of you say that it's important for the black sheep, or whatever you want to call myself, not plugging into the family business, how important would you say it is for kids like myself to actually listen properly to their parents?
I think the strongest advice I'd give is to be involved and listen and learn, so that everyone's got a role to play in the family business, whether they're involved working in it or around it or supporting it or understanding it, or putting up the fact that sometimes mum or dad might be more stressed than other times because things are going on. Whether it's the advisors or the family can let the advisors or the people involved in the business can let the rest of the family know how they feel and how they're coping. Very, very important. Just to stay abreast of things and look after each other, because you said it before. It's not the money. It's what are you trying to achieve? What legacy are you trying to leave? And how do you want to keep your family set up? So, the more you're abreast of things, just as it's very important that we know, in your case, Tom, where your business up to and where your family is and how you're coping and what's going on. So it's just the reciprocity of that.
That's an enormous word, and we're all thoroughly impressed.
Yeah, and that 10-point word, I've got nothing else.
Next episode, we're going to be looking at the next generation, which will be really super interesting. But first, I want to thank Stephen, Graham and Tom.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
For further information, please visit our website hlb.com.au.